Welcome aboard, Giants fans, to episode 56 of Talk is Cheap, our New York Giants podcast right here on NJ.com. I'm Joe Giglio, joined as always here by Jordan Renan, James Cratch. They cover the Giants for NJ Advanced Media. Just a little less than a month until training camp opens, kind of the weird dead period of July, but there always is something to talk about with the Giants and around the NFL. So we'll kind of do a spring recap and look ahead to what this summer will be. And we also have some news, a little bit of a change to the Giants around NJ Advanced Media, and obviously with this podcast, which we will talk about as well. Jordan, we'll start with you. We'll give you the floor. Welcome aboard, and how you doing, bud?
I'm doing all right, Joe. Unfortunately, though, or maybe fortunately for me, this is my last episode of Talk is Cheap. You know, I've been here since the beginning. This is kind of my baby was so, but I'll be. This will be my last episode, so I'm leaving NJ Advanced Media. I'll have more on my future coming up, but not right now. So in the meantime, my last day is Friday, July 1st. So sad times. So yeah, not sad, but yet happy at the same time. So we'll see how it all pans out. But in the meantime, this is going to be my last time on here with you two, which is the sad part of it, because Talk is Cheap was a pretty cool project we did. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I have too. End of an era, certainly, for the Giants coverage here at NJ Advanced Media and this podcast. And we obviously, before you hopped on, we had some different people covering the beat here. So, this is Jordan and I think you and I, Jordan, have done every one of these podcasts all 56 of them. You and I have both been a part
Joe,
of.
You definitely were out on a couple.
Oh, that's right.
That's right.
You were away or something. Maybe even had a kid.
I did have a kid, right? No, I was out.
Is that what it was? I think yes. Maternity leave. I think you were on.
I was on some family. That's right, some family leave. But
because the only reason I know is because it was the few episodes I had to host.
Well, that's right.
Yes.
And I did listen to them. I did listen. Now I remember. I did listen to them during my.
All right, now we know you're lying, Joe.
No, I did. But no, I remember now. But I guess this is everyone I've done here. You've been with me. I can't remember one, Jordan, where you weren't part of it. But anyway, so we'll have some fun here, and then we'll kind of towards the end, we'll talk about maybe some of your favorite memories, Jordan, of covering the beat. But James, you're here. You'll be here. How you doing, bud?
You're stuck. I'm good. Everybody's stuck with me still, unfortunately. So I'm here.
Well, we'll get by. We'll have some fun. So let's. And just to be clear, before we move on and start talking about the Giants a little bit, as we always do, the podcast isn't going anywhere. So if you are a fan of Talk is Cheap and you've downloaded it and you're with us every week, or you listen to us on the go, wherever you do, we'll still be doing these podcasts. Especially
you guys got to keep this going,
right? Of course,
it's going to go.
Here. It will go. The project took off, and Jordan, you were a big part of it. We will continue it as you depart, and we'll have a lot coming for you, especially when training camp opens in the season. So don't worry about that.
I've seen the iTunes rankings. The people demand it. They demand it. They want it.
Well, at least they download it. I'm not sure if they demand it, but they download it, which is good. So we'll still be around. But
tomato, Joe. Tomato. Come on.
Exactly. It's not. It's just how you look at it. But let's get into the Giants a little bit and kind of where they're at, and maybe kind of a recap of what this spring has been. As now everyone kind of goes on their vacation for a couple weeks before, the season. Really football ramps up at the end of July, and it goes, hopefully for the Giants' sake, until January, and of course I hope February. But it's a long season. It starts in a couple weeks. This is that time where you kind of put the final touches on it, but really look back. So, Jordan, when you think about this whole spring with the Giants, what's the kind of the word, or what pops into your mind? Obviously they did a lot to improve this football team, and in a few weeks we'll see how well they did.
Ben McAdoo, that's what pops into my mind. It's the Ben McAdoo era. It's a new era. Tom Coughlin is not around. There's some changes. It's a different feel around the team. They go about their business differently. Hopefully you've seen some major changes in how they strengthen, condition, and train. And I think that is a huge focus as we're looking at the most injured team each of the last 3 years, which on its own merit is pretty ridiculous. 3 years in a row, the most injured team in the league, it's hard to fathom that that's even possible. So to me, you saw changes with the McAdoo era. That's what the spring was all about. And you know what? you look around at the Giants, they have some minor injuries, but every team does, but nothing major. So that's a good thing. At this point last week, we're almost in July 4th, so let's count the JPP thing. At this point last week, they were without their number 1B wide receiver in Victor Cruz, right? He was still coming back. He still hadn't done anything, really. They were without JPP after he injured his hand. Will Beatty was out. So the team was already without 3 huge players. I mean, you're talking about your star defensive end, your starting left tackle, and your 1B receiver. So this year, not in that situation. Victor Cruz still hasn't practiced, but everything so far is actually positive with him. Plus, at this point, after 2 years out, you don't have the same expectations for him. So you have to have lesser expectations for him. Anything you get from him is a complete bonus. You hope he plays. You want him to play. You want him to come back. You want him to be even half of what he was before, and you'd be happy with that. But you can't count on anything at this point with him. But right now, I mean, that's the beauty of the spring usually, is every team is undefeated. And there's optimism and positivity. And I think we see that here early in the Ben McAdoo era.
Yeah, I feel the same way. And James, so this will be your second year on the beat. I mean, and how would you compare, and I know we'll probably get into it a little bit, but this is the anniversary weekend of JPP's accident, obviously. But how would you compare the feeling you have about the Giants now compared to 1 year ago when you first started and really, got running with this team and following them?
I started, I believe 2 weeks after JPP's accident. So basically right when training camp started. And even on day one, a lot of people, the vibe around the Giants was this wasn't a very good team. This probably was going to be Tom's last year. They were going to have a real hard time making the playoffs, being competitive. Now, Jordan said, it's all optimism. It's all good vibes. No one's seriously injured. Sterling Shepard and Darian Thompson had great offseason programs, at least from what we saw when the media was allowed at practice. People think, Shepard's going to be a star. Thompson could start at safety and finally fill a hole the Giants have, really struggled with. You see Vernon and JPP, you see all the other additions they've made. So it just feels like there's a lot of wind behind their sails. There's a lot of positive feelings that people think this can be a year they kind of turn around. I mean, I don't know if they will or they won't. We won't know that until September. But I think when training camp opens up in a couple of weeks, people are going to feel good about the season ahead, which I don't know was necessarily the case a year ago.
Yeah, I think you feel more positive about the team. I think this is a better team than it was last year. And like you said, you mentioned some of the big names that they signed, the Olivier Vernons, the Janoris Jenkins. I think that was sort of the deal last year of why everyone looked at the team. Like, they went into the offseason and they tried to find 10 role players, that could fit in and contribute. And they needed difference makers. And everybody kind of knew it. And somebody asked me the other day the biggest mistake I thought that Jerry Reese has made in the past 3 or 4 years. And I said that because I thought last year they tried to just plug gaps with decent guys rather than get real difference makers. And this year, you get the feeling that with Vernon, with Janoris Jenkins, with Damon Harrison, that they have some proven real players. It's not, JT Thomas and Jonathan Casillas or those kind of guys again. So I think that gives you a much more positive feeling about this crew and more optimism for this year.
How about big picture when we kind of look ahead to what this division is? I mean, I know things will change. Injuries will happen. I mean, last year, Tony Romo and, things change all the time with injuries and how the division shapes up. But from my perspective, guys, I look at the NFC East and I just kind of shrug my shoulders. Like, any of these teams, I think, probably could win this thing. I don't know if there's an 11-win team in there. I'd probably guess there isn't, which means, it's not crazy to take any team and say, yeah, they could go 10-6. I mean, the Redskins did it last year. So how do you kind of stack up the Giants right now with we know that things will change between now and opening day? James, where do you kind of slot them in? I mean, the Redskins won it last year. You were kind of, on them from the middle of the season saying this team's probably the best of this weird bunch. How about right now?
I would put the Giants. I still think the Redskins are better on paper. I mean, who knows if they're going to duplicate the season they had a year ago. And it wasn't a great season, but it was good enough. I think the Giants are.
I think they won 5 in a row to end the year, something like that, to get into that playoffs.
I mean, obviously everybody keeps on saying Kirk Cousins has never beaten a winning team, so that's something that he'll have to end this year. But I would put the Giants hair below the Redskins. I think they're better than the Eagles, and I think it's Giants and the Cowboys in the middle. And I don't really know what to make of the Cowboys. I mean, on one hand, if Romo's healthy, they should be good. But on the other hand, they have a lot of roster issues as well, and they look like they might have a pass rush that rivals the Giants, at least on early going in the year with all the suspensions, to be completely, punchless. So the Cowboys are a mystery to me. I think the Giants are kind of there right in the middle. I would put the Redskins ahead of them, Eagles behind the pack.
Yeah, Cowboys definitely have potential with that offense, but that defense is a big question mark for them. So I'm also a little wishy-washy on the Cowboys. I'm not blown away by the Washington Redskins either. I don't think they're in the midst of building something, like a lot of teams, you could see them on the rise. The Carolina Panthers have been doing it pretty much for 3 or 4 years. The Seattle Seahawks did it, the steady climb. Okay, they're starting to build a team. They're acquiring all this young talent. When you look at the Washington Redskins, they're not built like that. This isn't, they still have Deshaun Jackson, a veteran, Pierre Garçon, a veteran. Their defense isn't especially young or actually even that talented. I mean, when you look around, maybe their secondary is better when they have Breland and Josh Norman playing together. But, this isn't like a team that's been built up from the ground. I think that's on the, ascent. So I think there's a lot of 9-7, 7-9 possibilities between these teams. And it all usually depends on injuries and how the schedule plays out. So that's sort of how I view it. The Eagles, I think, are probably the worst team in the division right now, at least for this year, especially with their question mark at quarterback. So, quarterback's the most important position, and you don't know what are you going to get from Sam Bradford? Where's Carson Wentz? How are they going to get him in there? So the Giants, the Giants, Redskins, and Cowboys I see in that 9-7 range, and the Eagles will drop below. So there's not that 12-4 team. I don't see any of these teams going 12-4 and under pretty much any scenario.
Yeah, I don't either. This doesn't seem like there's a great team at all in this division, and what's going to make these division games, obviously that much more important as we go through.
Nobody's well-rounded enough. I mean, there's no team that you look at and you say that's a good offense. That team has a lot of potential on both sides of the ball. I mean, there's just a lot of question marks on all those teams.
There are. Speaking of offense, I wanted to ask you guys about this one. I think, James, you wrote about it this past week, and what Eli Manning said about the Giants and their potential to score about 28 points a game. And I thought you had some interesting nuggets in there about teams that actually reached that mark. I mean, the Giants weren't far off last year, a little over 26. So you think 28's not that big of a jump? And
I think that number was distorted, though. I'll get to that in a bit. But I think it was distorted to 26, to be honest.
Okay, and I think I saw some of your tweets, Jordan. I know where you're going with this. So, yeah, I definitely want to hear what you think about that. But last year, 26, a little over 26. Eli thinks they can get to 28. And what I found interesting before we talk about how they got to where they got last year is, James, what you wrote about the teams that have actually reached that mark, I think, over the last 5 years. I mean, virtually, you're almost guaranteed to be a winning team, at least the teams that have done it, and make the playoffs. It doesn't feel like that is a magic number in the NFL, but I guess, the last 5 years, it has been. James, did you think that was interesting, too, when you kind of saw those numbers as you were writing your piece?
Yeah, I was surprised. I mean, in the last 5 years, dating back to 2011, 18 teams have averaged 28 or more points a game. 17 finished with winning records. 16 made the playoffs. The one team that didn't make the playoffs was Chip Kelly's 2014 Eagles team that went 10-6, I believe, and did not get in as a wild card.
And that was a weird year because I think there were 2 11-win teams that got the wild cards that year?
I believe so.
Yeah.
And the one team with the Saints, I forget which year, but they went 7-9, but they averaged it. So you would assume that if there was a team that was going to have a losing record and score that many points, the Saints would kind of fit the bill.
Right.
And a lot of these teams, when I say playoffs, I don't have the exact numbers on hand, but it wasn't a bunch of 10. A lot of these teams were going 12-4, 13-3, 14-2, 15-1. So you're right; it doesn't seem like a whole lot, but it seems to be a magic number for whatever reason. So Jordan will talk about how it's a little distorted, and he makes some very good points. But if they hit that number, they have a very good chance, at least recent history tells us, to be back in the playoffs.
That's a big number, though, and look, This is a pretty good offense, but they weren't a great scoring offense last year. They couldn't get. They were terrible in the red zone. At 29th in the league, they couldn't, and that's partially because they couldn't run the ball. So you put those two together, and the offense wasn't really good at putting up points on the board. They weren't great. I mean, I shouldn't say weren't good. They weren't great. They were pretty average at putting up points. Save for a few games. The Saints game was definitely one that they put up a lot of points, but they had trouble in the red zone, and a lot of the points, especially early. Think about that Cowboys game. Remember the Cowboys game early in the season, for week 1. I mean, the Giants scored 26 points, but I mean, I'm not sure the exact details off the top of my head, but a lot of that was off turnovers. And the offense did very little of producing those 26 points. That happened a lot with this team. They produced, as bad as their defense was, and obviously when your defense stinks, it limits the amount of possessions that you have. So more possessions, their defense should be improved. More possessions should help them. Turnovers are the biggest, help to an offense. So the Giants scored 26 points. I believe Tremaine McBride either had a fumble recovery for a touchdown. Is that what it was in the Cowboys game?
I think so. Was that the game, as we talk about the history of this podcast, was that the one, Jordan, you and I did you were in an airport in Dallas?
Yes, that is correct.
The Giants had all the issues in the last 2 minutes of the game with the way they managed the clock.
Yeah, after I talked to you, I actually talked to Rashad Jennings on the phone. I remember that. Right as I was walking onto the plane. About the whole thing. Yeah.
Quite a morning right there.
That was definitely quite a morning.
No, but I think your point is well taken. I mean, they put up points, but it was a weird way they did it, and 28's a big number. I mean, I would think to me they do have the firepower to get to that number a lot. They probably will get to that number, quite a few times. But to average 28, even going back to the numbers you said, James. I mean, that's 5 years. You said 18 teams have done it, right? So that's a little over. How many a year? I mean, it's not like 3/4 of the league or even half the league or. Mm-hmm. A third of the league does that every year. That's a big number, even though it seems like they could do it.
Yeah, no, I mean, and if we talk about last year, I mean, this is not like a perfect thing, but they lost 10 games last year. If they had scored 28 points in 6 of those games, they would have won the game.
Right, and Tom Coughlin would probably still be around.
And Jordan's right. They had a lot of turnover, catalyzed scores, and everything, but. Remember that Dallas game, if they just score a touchdown there instead of Rashad not trying to score, and I'm sure we'll talk about that later on in the show, they would have had 28 points. I think that's my math is right. So if they can convert those red zone opportunities this year, which is saying a lot because they have to run the ball better, they could, even with the turnover stuff built in, they could be a 28 point a game offense, but they got to prove it.
Yeah, well, they're going to need the defense to play better, which we would assume. I'm going to assume that they will. They were 32nd in the league last year, and B, create those same turnovers. They created the 5th most turnovers in the league up until probably their bye week in week 11. I think they had produced more turnovers maybe than any other team in the league. Mm-hmm. So they're going to need that again and their special teams were good. They produced a couple touchdowns, so that was definitely helpful. And I don't think they gave up any last year, which was definitely
special teams.
Yeah, did they give up
the
late in the year?
The kickoff return to the Redskins in week 3?
Okay,
and something else, I think.
All right, so I guess that's a watch, but still, those are two. It's not that often. I mean, more than half the teams in the league did not score a special teams touchdown. So there's another 14 points that the special teams gave them. That they didn't have. They really haven't had much of that the last couple of years of any sort of special teams and return touchdowns. I think they had like 5 return touchdowns, 3, 4, 5 return touchdowns. So those are all direct impact on the scoring. Now, the other side, I mean, their passing offense is solid. The other thing is, if they're able to run the ball better, I know it might be able to produce some points when they're in the red zone, but it could also slow down the game. So it's almost is it a trade off there, or does one outweigh the other?
Right, it's a good point. And then you brought up the defense having to play better. I almost think of it in a way like with basketball, like with pace. I mean, if their defense is playing better, they're giving up less points. They won't have to open up the passing. Maybe they could run it more because they have a lead. So, the 28 points per game thing, it stands out. And if they do that, they're probably going to have a winning record. But at the same time, like if their defense is much better, they're not going to need to score 28 points a game. They could average 25, 26 like last year and be a better team. So, it's all in
if you're
context,
up 24,
right?
if you're up 24-10, you're not going to sit there and you throw the ball downfield all the time.
Exactly.
You're going to be, if you're actually in that situation, which they really weren't in that situation very often last year. Every game seemed to be close. When you're actually ahead, then you slow the game down, you run the ball, and you're not trying to put up all these points on the board. So there's a lot of factors that go into it. This is going to be a good offense, though. It should be a good offense. That I think is what we're all in agreement with, and it's why we're having this conversation in the first place.
It should be, yeah, and I think it's going to be a fun one to watch, and we're going to start doing it in a couple weeks in training camp. So we kind of recapped the spring and looked ahead a little bit here, and I guess to wrap up episode 56, Jordan, this being your last episode of Talk is Cheap, and last couple of days with us, give us some thoughts and just kind of memories of being on the beat. How many years did you cover the Giants for NJ Advanced Media?
I joined in November of 2013. So by my first game, everyone, they say, oh, they've been terrible since you came, which is true. Don't get me wrong. But it's not as if they weren't terrible before I came, because when I joined, my first game, I wasn't really even working yet, but I went there just to sort of scout, get a lay of the land, was the Minnesota Viking game with Josh Freeman.
Oh, the Monday night game.
The Monday night game. So they were 0-6 already at that point. So actually when I joined, right, they finished 7-9. So they actually went 7-3 that first year after I joined. They were 0-6 before and 7-3 after. So don't blame it all on me, Giants fans. It's not all my fault. They stunk on their own to get to 0-6. But yeah, that was an interesting game. And then on the way home, this is one of my first memories, is I was living in Philly at the time, and I'm driving back, and they were doing construction on the turnpike, so I was dead stopped at like 2 a.m. Took me about 4 hours to get home. So good start to covering the Giants. But Tom Coughlin is my main memory of just him being a complete curmudgeon for pretty much most of the 3 years, and give me a hard time at any opportunity he could. And my number one thing that I remember is this line of questioning with Coughlin before a preseason game. I guess it was last year or 2 years. I guess it was last year.
Last year, I think.
With the John Jerry and
Jeff Schwartz.
And Jeff Schwartz. It was before a preseason game. And
I think a Jacksonville game. I think.
Probably. That sounds about right.
Because Schwartz wasn't on the trip to Cincinnati.
Yeah, and it was a home game. So yeah. So Kim Jones from the NFL Network, asks Coughlin, who's going to start at safety, the safety spot opposite Landon Collins. And I don't even remember what the answer was. Let's say Cooper Taylor. He said Cooper Taylor is going to start and play the first quarter, and someone else is going to play the second quarter, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Bennett Jackson, something like that. Actually, might have been Bennett Jackson that started, because remember, that's the game he tore his knee.
Yeah.
When they put him back in the fourth quarter when they were running out of guys. Because Michael Thompson and Justin Curry had already suffered season-ending injuries, so they decided to put the guy who started back in. So, Kim Jones asks, and he, Coughlin gives an answer. He says whoever is going to start at safety. So I was like, oh, he's going to answer questions like that. Let me ask him who's going to start at right guard, John Jerry or Jeff Schwartz. And his answer just basically was a grumble. It was just like, you'll see when you show up. And the fact that it came right after Kim's question, we all basically were just laughing that it was so ridiculous. And like that's sort of the we all knew that was the relationship that existed at that point, that it was just like, oh my God, all right, guess that's how it's going. And it was just a big, it wasn't even a discernible answer. It was just you'll see when you show up. So yeah, that sort of epitomizes my NJAM or NJ.com. Actually, when I started, it was called NJ.com. Officially, was my employer. That sort of epitomizes what I remember most of my 3 years on the beat here. Because really, they stunk. The first 2 years, they didn't have a meaningful December game. They were officially eliminated by December. And you know how hard that is to do in the NFL? That a quarter of the season of a 16-game season, you're not even mathematically in the playoff race. That's kind of hard to do.
Yeah, it's not good. It's not what you want there. Jordan, let me ask you this, because I was wondering this, because I would imagine over the years you covered the team, you wrote hundreds and hundreds of stories, hundreds of blog posts and stories, some longer and bigger than others. But which one sticks out to you? I mean, the one of all yours that I've read over the years is obviously kind of the research you did on Jerry Reese after the season last year with his draft picks and all that. I think that was probably one of the ones that stands out to me. During your time with the
everyone
company,
loves that one because
what's the one for you?
I felt like I had to go after, I had to respond to Jerry on that one. Like that, I felt like I was backed into a corner where I didn't have any choice but to write that. So, but to me, I'll tell you, this is one that I remember, but for the wrong reasons. There's a couple of things that maybe like 2 or 3 that I regret, and this one was. And I think John Mara should give me a pass on this. Like he would understand, because after that Jacksonville loss a couple of years ago, they blew a big lead, and they finished 7-9. So right. they were 4-9 at that point. I think they won their last 3 games of the season, or won 3 of their last 4, or something like that. So they blow the game, and I basically have a story written saying that, they're still playing for Tom Coughlin because this was a December game, but they were completely out of it. The first week of December, they were officially eliminated. They were playing for nothing. I was like, Tom Coughlin, give him credit. They're still playing for him. He's still got them playing for him. And then they just collapsed and fell apart and lost in some ridiculous ways. They turned the ball over. They gave him a touchdown. Eli fumbled inside his own 10. Then Larry Donnell, I think he fumbled. Did Donnell fumble or he bobbled or, one of his tripping, falling acts, and the ball lands in the arms of, what's the Oklahoma cornerback's name on Jacksonville? I forget his name. He's actually suspended, I believe, at the beginning of this year for PEDs. But Aaron Colvin.
Aaron Colvin, yeah.
Yeah. So he returns, he had just come back. He returns it for a touchdown. Complete disaster. Disastrous loss. So I had this story written that they're still playing for him and it's ready to go, and all of a sudden things turn around. I had the story written at halftime, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh my God, this team might finish 3-13, maybe even 4-12. 4-12. This team's destined for a 4-12 finish. This might be it for Tom, because 4-12 would have been pretty bad. I don't know if he would have survived 4-12 2 years ago. So in a matter of 5 minutes, as they blow the game, I turn this story immediately after the game from they're still playing hard for Tom Coughlin to they have no choice but to move on from Tom Coughlin and basically fire him, because this team is completely going to tank and they need to completely rebuild at this point. So obviously they end up winning 3 of their last 4 or whatever. They salvaged something. I don't know what they actually salvaged. They actually probably messed up, and it probably would have been better if they finished 4-12 and they got on with the moving forward process. But so I wrote they should basically fire Coughlin, and I ended up regretting that one as it turned out to be later on. So to me, that's the one that I always remember. And John Mara, I think he will understand, because after the season, he admitted that after that Jacksonville game, he wanted to fire everybody in the organization. So I took it one step less than John Mara. I only wanted to fire one person in the organization.
You know what? You probably regret that now, like you're saying, but I remember that game vividly too. I mean, and people I was watching the game with, that was the feeling after the game. Everyone's got to go after this. I mean, that loss was in that season. It was a bad season. They've had a lot of bad seasons lately, but that was a bad one. So I get it. I understand why you probably
Yeah, it was
felt
terrible.
like that. Yeah.
Because if you thought they were going to finish 4-12, you couldn't keep Kaufman after 4-12 there, could you? 3 straight years missing the playoffs, steady decline. It was 8-8, 7-9, and that was a bogus 7-9 because they, like I said, they went 7-3 in their last 10 just to get the 7-9. So 8-8, 7-9, and 4-12. That would have been okay. Let's blow it up mode. It would have had to be. Probably should have been.
Right, it would have been, like you said, and maybe it set them back a year. They didn't do that, but they are where they are now, and this podcast is as well. And Jordan, speak for myself, and I'm sure James as well. Appreciate all the episodes we did together and working together here. And
James,
good luck.
You don't have any good stories, James? Come on.
I was going to say,
pile on here. This is your opportunity, your last chance to bury me here.
Yeah, tell us the worst of Jordan working.
Give it the dirt on me.
There's no worse.
What's he gonna do? Leave the company now? Like it's over. Like, he can do it.
One of the things that the one season we were together was, and Jordan will laugh about this, the Golden Corral trip after they lost to the Redskins. All right, so we're in Washington, which, as it turned out, was the beginning of the end for the Giants last year. I'll never forget. They were 5-5 coming out of the bye week. Everybody thought they were going to win the division.
Yeah, they win that game. They win the division.
They win the division. Everybody's feeling good, and they just were absolutely atrocious in Washington. Rainy day. Reuben Randall not fighting back for the ball in the end zone.
Didn't they not even they basically didn't show up until the fourth quarter, and then they almost won the game.
Odell made some ridiculous touchdown catch. It was the same way. So it was
Shocker.
Jordan, myself, and our columnist, Steve Politti. And Politti's driving the car back to New Jersey. And we get out of there, and we say, all right, we're going to stop to get dinner on the way home. And we're just driving and driving, and we cannot find any place to eat. There was it was all like gas station, convenience stores. You couldn't find an Applebee's, anything. So we end up going to a Golden Corral and a gas station somewhere in Maryland, right? Maryland?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of like past somewhere between Baltimore and Delaware, somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. So Jordan's
middle of nowhere.
Yeah, middle of nowhere. Big truck stop gas station. Jordan's in his suit. We walk into this Golden Corral at 10 o'clock at night. And
it's like walking into a truck stop in a suit, by the way.
And we had no idea, none of us had ever gone to a Golden Corral. And the people that worked there were they couldn't believe that we had never been to the greatness that is a Golden Corral.
They thought I was an alien. Me and my
so they're telling us how great their desserts are, and it was like a cupcake that you can buy at ShopRite. It was just. It sounded a lot funnier.
I did eat a lot of dessert. They had a fondue.
That reminds me, I lived in that area for about a year and a half, and my wife's a teacher, and we never went to there's a bunch of Golden Corrals there. We never went to one to eat, but all her students would go to the Golden Corral, and they would tell her how could you not go to the Golden Corral? And now I understand
the Red Lobster of buffets.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like.
The best part was they had a big a sign that said you could have private parties at the Golden Corral at the truck stop.
That must be what they've been doing.
I should have had my going away party there.
So, no, it was a lot of good stuff. That week 1 Dallas game was, I remember it was my first game week, real game on the beat, and the whole world caved in.
That was a disaster.
That was a disaster. Everything about New York sports and the Giants, it just kind of rolled into one. What else was there?
Let me tell that story while we're on that. That's one of the more interesting stories of being on the beat.
Yeah.
Was the Rashad Jennings story of how he mumbled under his breath as he walked away after talking to the media. I can't believe, in front of me and Dan Graziano from ESPN, can't believe they told me not to score, and then just walked away. And I was like, what?
You told me about this, and I was like, what?
Yeah, when I got back upstairs, I was like, I don't even know what to do with this at this point. This was late at night because they played the Sunday night game. Yeah, Sunday night.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't even know what to do with this because A, I didn't even understand it. I was like, did they really try not to score? Because nobody at that point even knew that. It wasn't even that easy to, it wasn't like you could watch it and be like, oh, they definitely tried not to score. And I was just like, what the heck is he talking about? And then the next day I had to call him up and be like, hey, I'm just making sure I got this right because I went back and looked at it, and this is what other people are saying is that they told you not to score there. And, that was certainly one of the more interesting things I've ever seen. And like I said, as I'm getting on the plane, I'm talking to Rashad Jennings about, hey, I just want to clarify what happened here. When did they tell you not to score? This is what happened, X, X, and X. And as I'm on the plane, I'm writing that story. And I actually published the story from the plane, from, however many feet you are in the air, which was an interesting one. We had a good time in New Orleans, though, James.
We did. We did. Can't probably go into too much on this podcast. It's family friendly, but we did have a good time. And then Drew Brees threw 7 touchdown passes.
Yeah, all I know is I woke up and next morning my phone was cracked. Don't know how it happened, but my phone was definitely cracked.
That sounds like New Orleans right there. You don't know how it happened, but it did.
Yeah, pretty much. That sums up New Orleans pretty well.
I remember Tampa when JPP came back. Jordan was you were playing golf, right? I think.
Yes.
So I was gonna so we knew JPP was gonna make the trip, be activated, and the Giants plane didn't take off. So I was sitting in a hotel room for 4 hours just waiting for them to say before I could go out to eat because I hadn't eaten all day. I remember that was kind of a miserable experience, but that was more of a me thing than a team thing. But no, it was a lot of good times. I thoroughly enjoyed working with Jordan. Sad to see him go, but he'll be on to bigger and better things that you'll learn about soon enough. And there'll be a new guy here who will be named later. So,
yes, we will continue with the Giants coverage, obviously, and with Talk is Cheap, and we'll be back soon with that, and we'll let you know who our new third member of this podcast will be. But Jordan, good luck, and we had a good time on this podcast, and we wish you the best of luck.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it, guys. And you know what? Everyone out there, you'll be in good hands. James and whoever is replacing me, we'll keep up the tradition. We're on a pretty good line, a pretty good lineage here of quality Star Ledger, NJ.com, NJAM beat writers. So they have a lot to live up to, and I'm sure they will. They're good people, and they're good at what they do. So keep it up, man.
Yeah, this company's kind of been a pipeline for some really good people, especially on this beat. So we'll keep it up. And Jordan, good luck. And obviously, thank you for being part of the podcast. And thank you for listening to episode 56 of Talk is Cheap, the farewell podcast with Jordan with NJ Advanced Media. We'll be back soon. Myself, James, and we'll add a third member to this crew before so long. Don't forget, iTunes, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, anywhere you want to listen, you can listen and be part of Talk is Cheap right here on NJ.com. Thanks for listening.